If you live in a home like me, it doesn't get too much light, and you have succulents like Echeveria or Echeveria, however you want to say it, I prefer Echeveria, then you'll know all about this situation that we have here. So this is one I bought from IKEA a few years ago, and it often does this because it's stretching for the light. So the long stem is stretching for the light, it's losing all its leaves. I mean, look how many leaves it's lost. Absolute mammoth amount. I don't know quite what's happened there. It was living in quite a dark spot. I did keep it away from the window, which was foolish on my part. So you might think that this plant is kind of done for, but not necessarily. All you need to do is quite a simple fix, and it's something I do pretty much every year to my Echeverias. I get rid of all the tired leaves at the bottom, like so, and I go through and take my snippers and behead. Oops, might have done that a bit too violently because I lost a few leaves at the top. Whoops. Anyway, so behead your guy. You might think that'll kill the plant, but honestly it doesn't, because this will grow roots. Once you put it into soil, it will grow roots. Now, in an ideal world, you should let this callus over for a day or two, just to let the wound that you just cut heal over so it doesn't rot when you put it into the soil. But to let you on a little secret, I've never done that. I've put it straight into soil and watered the soil as well. And so far, touch wood, I've not had any rotting issues. But I'm warning you that that is just me. Lots of advice out there is saying to let it callus over. But anyway, I've got a pre-made pot here, one I made earlier, of Cybotanica's Premium Cacti and Succulent Mix, which is a very good mix for succulents. So it's got all your bits of sand and perlite in there. So all you want to do basically is just plonk it in the middle of your soil, like so. Couldn't be easier. So you basically got rid of the lankiness. That'll regrow roots and it'll start regrowing and it'll get lanky again and you have to do it again. Like I say, I do it every year. So as with any plant that I'm repotting, I do like to give it a bit of a water, just to wet the soil, and this will settle the stem around the soil, so there's good contact. I'm getting water all over the leaves actually. But because there's farina on the leaves, it kind of just bounces off, which is quite nice. So just going round and just wetting all the soil, like so. Get rid of that water on that leaf. And that will regrow roots in no time. Now, leca can be a fantastic alternative to soil, not least because the fungus gnat can't make a home in leca because there's no soil for it to make babies, etc. So I've got my Philodendron mammui living in leca here, I've got my Philodendron Birkin there, and also living in just perlite, I've got my Ficus elastica teneki. So all these plants are living semi-hydroponically, which plants can thrive living semi-hydroponically. So with leca, I've got my plants living in a pot with leca clay balls, that's what they are, and there's a reservoir of water in the pot. But after a while, after a couple of months, this water can start to go a little bit murky, and also there can be a build-up of salts and minerals on the leca. So it's a good idea to go through every couple of months, just empty the reservoir of water that you've left the plant in, and then to go in under your tap and just rinse through the leca to get rid of those build-up of salt and minerals. And this should make for a healthier plant. So I like to spend a good couple of minutes under each plant, just rinsing through the leca like so. So I normally do it a bit longer than that, but to make this video relatively not too long basically, I'm just going to do it for a few seconds. So this is my Philodendron Birkin that I've had in leca for about 6 months I think, maybe a bit longer, 8 months. So he was living in soil, so I switched into leca because he was always struggling in soil. It's looking a little bit better, some new growth. Looks a bit ropey really. I don't know, I don't really understand the Philodendron Birkin. Always looks a bit ropey. And then live in my Ficus elastica teneki. So I'm just going to pour the excess water there. So plants living in perlite, it's a bit trickier to rinse through because perlite tends to go everywhere. Because it's very light compared to leca. So if you put the tap on too hard, then you'll find that the perlite kind of spills over the pot. So spend a good couple of minutes just rinsing through, and then when you're finished, you'll need to top up the reservoirs of water that the plants can soak up to keep the lacquer or the perlite hydrated. So with semi-hydroponics, you want to use a fertilizer that is specifically for hydroponics. So what I like to do, I've got my 1.5 litre watering can here. I'll just add probably maybe 1/8 of the cap that came with the bottle. Add that to the watering can, just rinse off the cap. Keep everything nice and clean, otherwise the cap tends to go a bit mouldy. And then in here, I've got my water conditioner that I use on all of my plants. So I just do about 3 drops there. Fill my watering can with water. Give it a bit of a shake. Just to make sure it's all nice and mixed up. And then you can fill your plants up. So I like to just go over the lacquer. I just fill it up about maybe 1/3 of the way up the pots. So I'll do my Philodendron Birkin here. So this way the plant can draw on the nutrients that are missing in water. You've now added the fertilizer, so it can draw on the nutrients that's sitting at the bottom of the pot. I've got a pothos devil's ivy that I have absolutely nowhere to put in my home, so I chose a spot down here hanging on my console that I keep all my plants over here. So it's quite a good 2 or 3 meters away from the window, and it's also got a chair in front of it, so it's really not getting enough light. So I will have to move it at some point, but you can see the damage that it causes with these yellowing leaves. So whenever there's a yellowing leaf on a plant, I like to prune it off. So sometimes you need to get your scissors, but because these leaves have gone by the wayside a long time ago, they're easy to pull off. So I like to go through. Some people say you just leave the yellowing leaves on the plant to die off naturally, but I say plants are there to be looked at and to look nice. So I want them to look nice, so I'll take off all the leaves, all the yellow leaves. It really is amazing just how fast the roots of our plants grow, and it's something you do need to keep an eye on, because I've got on my windowsill here my Monstera deliciosa. This was grown all the way from a wet stick, just a little stump, leafless stump that I propagated, and in 2, maybe 3 years it's grown these leaves that are now starting to fenestrate. But anyway, I checked the roots of this guy a few weeks ago, maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, and it was more or less fine. And then look at the state of him today. Absolute monster. Loads and loads of root, a thick mat of roots coming out of the bottom of the pot. Absolutely unbelievable. I mean, look at that. And it's got the world's longest, well, in my house anyway, area root, which is very interesting, I find, and see how long I can grow this. Maybe I can swing from the trees like Tarzan does. But anyway, this guy clearly needs to be repotted, so let's go and do it now. Now you might be wondering how on earth you're supposed to deal with something like this when you've got a mat of roots coming out of the pot. You might be thinking that you need to be really delicate and kind of loosen these roots up so they can go back through the hole, but that is really not the case. All you need to do is get your snippers out and just cut the whole thing off like so. This really doesn't harm the plant in any way, shape or form. Plants can handle a bit of a root pruning. It's something I've covered lots of times on the channel in lots of videos. So I'm just going to go through and just cut the bottom of these roots off like so. So this is a plant that's living in perlite semi-hydroponically. Also just going to break that off so I can easily get it out of the pot. Basically, this is why we do this rather than faffing around. So look at that, unbelievable growth. Where should I put that? I'll put that there. So this should now come out. You can feel it's very hard, the pot. There's lots of roots in here. So that's all the perlite coming out. It still doesn't want to come out. If that'll do the job, come on. If you are really struggling, then you can cut the pot out. if you want to sacrifice a plastic pot, which I might have to do, to be honest. Oh, there it is. My word. So they are healthy, nice healthy roots, exactly the colour you want to see. No black or anything as far as I can see. So Monstera plants do like to be a little bit snug in the pot. This is obviously too snug, I think. So I am just going to try and loosen up these a little bit. I'm not going to go too excessive, but these big roots, I'm just going to break these apart just to stop them circling so much. Okay, so you can be quite rough with Monstera roots. They do tend to bounce back quite quickly. As long as you've got lots of root tissue left, you should be fine. So there's an area root that's grown into the soil. It's a bit annoying for me, so I'm going to cut that off actually. Should I cut that off? Maybe not. Maybe that's anchoring the stem into the pot actually. I might just cut it back. There. Okay. So I'm keeping the long area root there. That's going to be outside of the pot, just because I want to see how long I can grow it. So I've got a nice big pot here, or bigger pot anyway. That's maybe 2 sizes bigger than the one it was living in. I'm just sizing it up. It looks like it's going to fit nicely. So I've got my box of perlite here. So plants do grow quite nicely in just perlite, hydroponically, as long as you give it hydroponic fertilizer, or give it the nutrients that it needs to grow big and strong. That's all you need to do. And it can even grow in just water. So I'm going to put a layer at the bottom, like so. Hopefully this perlite isn't going to go everywhere. I think it might. Just want to keep the plant, the crown of the plant, more or less where it was, and I'm just going to easily backfill with the perlite. So it's nice and easy to repot with something like perlite, leca, or semi-hydro, the little stones that you get. It just falls neatly into place. So I'm just going around to do it evenly so the plant isn't leaning to one side. That's a common trap that you can fall into with repotting your plants. You tend to dump it all on one side because it's easier, and that makes the plant lean to one side and you have to do a lot of jiggery pokery to correct it. So I am making a bit of a mess all over the floor here. Just filling in the gaps. Don't need to be too worried about burying the stem because it is perlite. It'll stay look very airy with soil. Once you water it, kind of loses the air gaps, which can suffocate the crown of the plant when it's buried too deeply. So there you go. That is my plant now repotted. So it'll grow new roots into the perlite that I've given it. Hopefully it should push out lots of new variegated leaves. I've got my alocasia fried here, which, to be honest, is the best this plant has ever looked. Beautiful plant. So I'll keep this under my grow lights now. I've done so for the last year because in the winter it was living on my windowsill. It wasn't getting enough light, so it went dormant and lost all its leaves. So this is all new growth this year. If you've got an alocasia at home, then you might notice new growth coming out of the soil in little clumps, which is exactly what's happening here. I've got a bigger clump there. These two new leaves growing out of the soil. So what you might not know about alocasia is that they grow corms. You can't really see any at the moment, but they grow corms in the soil. Or they spread corms in the soil from which new plantlets grow. So it's a good idea, I think, if you want to grow the collection of plants in your home, to go through and try and prise these apart. Sometimes it can be a bit tricky, especially when relatively root bound like this guy is, well, there's a lot of roots anyway. So I like to go in, so I'm going to aim to try and prize this clump here, just so I've got extra alocasia in my house. What I'm going to do, how am I going to do this? Just going to go in and kind of break apart some of these roots carefully without ripping too much, and see if I can locate that corm. Okay, so I'm just prizing it apart from the mother plant. It doesn't really want to come, but it doesn't realise that it's going to be in a much better place when I pot him up. He's going to be well looked after, fed, watered a lot. So come on little boy, you can come along. So he's grown quite a root system, this little clump. So it's all entangled in with all the other plantlets that we've got in here, plus the main plant in the middle. So just breaking it off from the mother plant, and hopefully when I pull it out, it's still got some root tissue left. So come on, you can go that way. And there you have it. Can't see the corm actually. So that just grew straight from the mother plant. But there is a little plantlet with some healthy root tissue. Very nice. So what we can do, we can put that back in the pot where it lived with some soil. And I'll do that after this video. So I'll put that aside for later, for me, an extra chore for me. But the focus is this guy, which has got a very nice large leaf and some other leaflets popping out. So I've got a pot that I made earlier, pot filled with Cybotanica's universal mix. Alocasias do well in this mix, I find. Not too chunky. Alocasias don't like it too chunky because they like to hold on to moisture a little bit. So it's going to be a bit tricky to get in actually. So I think I need to get this out. No, I'll get this. Just so that I can put the root ball in the pot like so. And then I'm going to backfill around with the soil that I just dumped in there, like so. It's a dead easy process to multiply the number of alocasias that you have. So I'm just giving it a press round, just to make sure that the soil is making good contact with the plant. Need a bit extra soil. See if I can tip this in. Like so, press that in. Just lifting it up so the crown of the plantlet I've got is not too buried, because that will rot the stems, but I think that's okay. So that is in there nicely. Voila. Now the thing I always do when I repot a plant, as I've said, this isn't the pot that it's going to live in, but just so I can catch the water. So I like to just give it a thorough drink. You can give it as much water as you like at this point. Won't do any harm, in fact it will benefit it. And what you'll notice when you do this is that there'll be depressions in the soil at the top. As the air is displaced by the water, it will create a little chasm in the soil at the top, which it kind of has there. So I'm just going to just top up with a little extra soil like so, just to make it nice and neat. There we have it. A brand new alocasia. So I'm going to put that under my grow light so it doesn't go dormant over winter, and we should have a nice happy plant. Watering orchids can be a bit intimidating, can't it? And it's a little bit different to how kind of water the rest of our plants. Well, it is for me anyway. I tend to bottom water all of my plants. I know I show both in my videos, but I do tend to bottom water. And with orchids, they need to be kind of doused over the sink to wet the bark that they live in, or the moss that they live in, because they don't want to be sat in water. The roots don't, because they're kind of detrimental. They don't really like that. So I've got a selection of my orchids here, 4 of my orchids, very nice plants. And you can always tell when an orchid needs to be watered based on 2 things really, well 3 things I guess. How dry the bark is looking, how firm the leaves are feeling, if they're feeling a little bit soft and need a drink, and also the roots, if they're starting to look a little bit grey and dry, they need a top up of water. So it's a case of going over to your sink. I'm going to use my big 6-litre watering can because it does take a fair bit of water to water these 4 plants because you're pouring water over the root ball. And to my water I've added Bio Bloom, which is a flowering fertiliser or fertiliser for flowering plants, and also, as usual, my water conditioner, a few drops of that. So there's no real kind of science to it. Just take your plant over to your sink and just absolutely douse the root ball and all the roots with water. Just let it run through. So some people are a little bit concerned about getting water on the leaves of an orchid. You see lots of tips online about saying that you shouldn't do that. This one's very dry. The leaves feel a little bit soft, so this one does need a drink. So there's lots of advice saying not to let the leaves get wet, but in my experience it doesn't tend to do too much damage really. The most important thing is that you're watering all the roots and wetting the bark. So I like to go through and do this, probably, oh, that one's leaning over. I like to go through and do this maybe once every week and a half, maybe 2 weeks during the spring and summer. And then autumn, winter, I might dial that back down to once every 2 or 3 weeks. But I do generally keep an eye on how the leaves are doing. So I will go through and fill the leaves and look at the roots as well. I won't just go and do it willy-nilly basically, and just water basically when the orchid doesn't need it. Because the worst thing you can do to an orchid is to overwater the roots, and they'll start to rot, and then you'll start to see yellowing leaves and things like that, which is not good. So as you can see, I've used a decent amount of water here. Pretty much my whole 6-litre watering can. Don't worry too much about it dripping through into the pot. It will be fine, it will kind of evaporate and the bark will soak it all up. So those are my plants, my orchid plants, all watered for another couple of weeks. I've got my newly repotted Monstera here that I just repotted into perlite, into a bigger pot. And something that it is missing is support for this stem. So Monsteras do grow best when they've got something to climb against. And the solution to that could be a moss pole, could be even bamboo sticks. I've used that before. Not the greatest thing in the world though. But a very attractive solution that I like are these trellises. So they've got rubber coated feet that you can stick into the soil, or the perlite in my case, of the plant, like so. Deep in, try not to destroy that arrowroot. So up against, behind the stem. And the great thing about these is that they are stackable, so you can buy these individually from their store and you can stack them up like so. So let's try and get this in, like so. So it's got lots of room for this plant to grow up this trellis now. So all that needs to happen now is for the stem to be tied on. So for that I've got some Velcro plant tape. I've got this listed in my Amazon store. The trellis, you can get a 10% discount, I believe, of all their products. There's a link in the description to this video if you're interested in that. So you can take a piece like so, and then just tie the stem to the trellis. Don't know why I'm saying trellis. Like so. And as it grows, you can continue to put some more tape around it to grow up the vine. So I think that kind of puts it in its place nicely, doesn't it? Gives it something to lean on. So I'm going to pop down my windowsill for it to grow. One of my absolute favourite plants in the garden is the hydrangea. And I've got this beautiful Annabelle hydrangea, I think it's called here, with big white flowers. I love hydrangeas because the flowers last all summer long, more or less. And this one, there's a massive plant I've got here, and it's just producing tons of these big white heads, white flowers. It's not too late to propagate your hydrangea. So that's what I'm going to do now. Take a couple of cuttings so that I can grow more of these plants in my garden. So the trick you need to do is to locate a nice big long stem and make a cut just underneath a leaf node. So I'm now going to get out of the sun and show you how to prep these. So I've got a nice long stem piece here, hydrangea, and where the leaves come out of the stem, these are nodes. So we want to make sure that we have a node from which the roots will grow out still attached. So we can get 2 cuttings from this piece here. So you want to count 2 sets of leaves and cut just above the top leaf. Whoops, wind's blowing out of my hand. So I'm just going to cut just above, so I'm left with a stem piece with some leaves at the bottom, which you can take off like so. And then I've got 2 leaves at the top, which will help photosynthesize, help the stem photosynthesize for it to grow roots. But with a hydrangea, because this stem piece, this cutting doesn't have roots yet, it's going to dry out quite quickly. And the more leaf surface area there is, the more it's going to dry out. So what we like to do is to cut the leaves in half. And that is a perfectly viable cutting that we can stick into soil that I'll show you in a bit. So we can go again on this piece here. We can again just trim the bottom off at the bottom there. And then go 2 nodes up. Another cutting here. Again, get rid of the leaves at the bottom. And then again, take our leaves and just trim them back. So you don't need these leaves apart from to allow the cutting to photosynthesize. Once the plant develops roots and new stems, these leaves will go by the wayside anyway, so we don't need to worry about cutting these in half. So I've now got my 2 cuttings there. I've got a pot of soil that I made earlier, and all we need to do is just pop them into the soil like so. Do 2 per pot if you wanted to, like this. So 2 cuttings there in the pot, then grab your water and just give it a good drink. Like so. And they should root in a couple of weeks. Hydrangeas are dead easy to root, so you want to keep this in a shaded spot in your garden. Don't let any sunlight touch the leaves because that'll fry it and the cuttings will die. So I'm going to keep it just next to this shed that I've got here, where it gets shade all day long, so completely out of sunlight. So September means that we're coming towards the end of summer and our plants have enjoyed lots of growth, hopefully, during the whole summer. It just means we need to keep an eye on some of our plants and the positions they live in. And kind of as winter and autumn approaches, we need to kind of reevaluate where we're keeping our plants. Case in point being my croton here that lives up on this shelf. So it's in between 2 shelves and it's enjoyed lots of growth from this grow light here and this window here, east facing window. So it's enjoyed a few inches this year and it has reached the top of this shelf. So it's a bit cramped. So I need to move this guy so that he can spread his wings. This spot right here is the perfect spot for this croton, I think. It's got lots of room for it to grow nice and tall, and it's got this grow light hanging over it, so I should be very happy there even though it's a good couple of meters away from the window. I've got a similar problem with the Peperomia obtusifolia that I've got on my windowsill here, and it's underneath this kind of windowsill extension that we had built a couple of years ago, so I can have more and more plants in the house basically. So it's reached kind of the top of its level, it's put on lots of growth over the summer. So it could do with being upgraded to top shelf basically. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to grab the plant, which is very nice by the way, I highly recommend it because it's a very full, gorgeous looking plant. I'm going to take one of these bad boys off. I think I'm going to take another Peperomia Santorini, and this doesn't really grow tall, it's a bushy kind of plant. So I'm going to pop that where that was, down there, and this guy can run free growing there, go as tall as it wants. Lots of room for it to grow. I mentioned how alocasias go dormant when they don't have enough light in your home. This is something I always face in winter in my house with all my alocasias. They always go dormant, especially the Alocasia Friedeck. So it's a good idea if you have alocasias on windowsills relying on the light you have outside from the sun. It's always a good idea to move them under grow lights if you don't want them to go dormant. And this guy, I think, is already starting to go dormant, because look, it's lost a leaf there that I can pull off, lost another leaf there, and that one's going by the wayside. So it's going down to 3. That one looks like it's starting to yellow as well. So with the slightly shorter days, this does a number on alocasias. So it lives on this windowsill, relying on the natural light. So it now needs to be switched to grow light so I'm able to keep all its leaves. And the perfect new home for this alocasia over the winter, autumn and winter, is to live right here on this black IKEA cabinet that I've got in my living room. To give your gloomy winter, and especially your Christmas, some colour to brighten it up, I highly recommend that you plant one of these. This weird looking thing is an amaryllis bulb. So amaryllis is a indoor flowering plant, winter time. So if we plant one of these up now, it should be ready for Christmas. I'll show you what to do. It's a good idea to put your amaryllis bulb into a nice decorative pot. So I think terracotta looks nice. I wouldn't normally put it in terracotta, I would normally glaze it, but I've not got any glazed ones left over, so I'm gonna have to put it in glazed and keep my eye on it. So the idea with your amaryllis bulb is to not put it in a pot that is too big. It wants to be snug in the pot. So that's about the right size pot. So when I put it in, it's only going to have a couple of centimeters around the edge, and that's ideal for an amaryllis. And the other point is that you want to bury 2/3 of the amaryllis, but not the top third. So I'm going to add some soil to the bottom like so. I'm going to size this up, get the roots sat on top of that soil, and I want it just poking out from the top of the pot like so. Then it's a case of just filling around it. So I'm using Hydroponic Universal Mix, that you can get a 10% discount by using my link in the description. So I'm just filling around. So it's quite snug in here. It's quite difficult to get my fingers between the pot and the bulb, and that's ideal. They want to be snug. So give it a little taparoo. So I'm just burying it so that the top third of the amaryllis is poking out of the soil like so. Just give that a little press around the edges to make sure it's securely in there. Another tap. So that's what you're looking for, snugly in there. And then the next stage is to give it a drink. That's what I'm going to do. Give it a drink all around, just make sure all the soil is nice and moist. And this will activate the bulb now to start sizing up and start sending out its red shoots. So you can get amaryllis in all sorts of different colours, but because I'm aiming for Christmas, I've gone for red, nice red flowers. And like I say, they take about 6 to 8 weeks to flower. So if you start doing it at the beginning of October, it should be ready in time for Christmas. So that is it all watered, and I let that run through. It's important to have a drainage hole for your pot so that the water can run through, because it doesn't want to be sat in wet soil. And then you want to put it somewhere relatively warm. Doesn't have to be hot or anything, but just a nice 20 degrees Celsius or something, and nice and bright. They like direct sun, so I'm going to put it on my windowsill. The biggest enemy to our plants at this time of year is radiators. When the heating comes on, the dry air starts swirling around, and autumn and winter is the time when our plants can tend to look a little bit ropey. This is particularly true if you've got your plants sat on top of a windowsill with a radiator underneath it. You want to think about moving them away somewhere else. So I've got this Ficus elastica here, rubber plant, and as you can see, it's nestled right against this column radiator in my dining room. Got this stem here that's practically touching it, in fact it is touching it. So to get the best out of this plant during the tricky season of autumn and winter, I'm going to have to move it. Right, I think it's going to have to live here. So it's now a good 1.5 meters away from that radiator, but it is right up against where Mrs. Sheffield works. So I don't know what she's going to say about it, but that's a worry for another day. Do make sure you download my free plant problems troubleshooting handbook that you can get with the link in the description to this video. It goes over all the common problems that you see with your plants, like leaf drop and mushy stems and leaves, why they happen, and what you can do about it, all in an easily digestible digital handbook, and it's completely for free. I've got my Philodendron Whipple Way with me here, which is a very beautiful plant. It's a new plant for me that I got in my unboxing video. I imported it all the way from Asia, but it's grown very handsomely since I got it. Lots of new leaves, and it has now got some arrowroot at the back of the stem. And this is a massive wasted opportunity, and there's only one thing for it. So this plant is absolutely begging to have something to climb up, basically. That's what these area roots are for. They want to attach onto something to climb up, strengthen it, and then size up the leaves, mature the leaves. That's what happens. So I'm going to pop this guy onto a moss pole. So you can use a plank of wood or bamboo sticks if you want, just as support for the area roots to start using to hoist itself up higher and higher. But I'm going to use a moss pole. So I've got here a plastic moss pole that I got from Amazon. There's lots that you can choose from, and I filled it with Cybotanica's sphagnum moss. I've not got these listed in Amazon yet because I don't necessarily recommend this particular plastic moss pole, because the top and the bottom, the bit of plastic is too big. So when you stack it, you've got too much plastic and there's not enough room for area roots to grow into. So I don't necessarily recommend these, but this is what I've got on hand at the moment. So until I try something better, I'm not going to recommend them. But anyway, it should be okay for this. So what I'm going to do is get this guy out of the pot, hopefully in one piece. There we go. Just break off some of the chunky soil. Okay, now I've got a bigger pot. I'm going to size everything up. I'm going to pop this in like so, and then see how this fits next to it. There we go, that should be okay. So what I'm going to do, I've got some soil here. I'm going to put a base layer at the bottom. So you want a pot that's big enough to support both the moss pole and the plant root system. So I'm trying to keep the crown of the plant more or less at the same level, the same depth. So I just need to add a bit more soil, like so. Just press it down. Pop this guy in up against the moss pole, like so. So you want where the roots are going out of the stem, you want that side to be against the moss pole, so that the roots will start growing into the moss and it will strengthen itself, become the secondary root system for the plant. And it doesn't have to rely so much on the pot of soil that it lives in. The moss pole becomes the main kind of support system, and then you can keep stacking your moss poles and grow a nice big mature plant. I'm just filling around with some soil, just topping it up. It's looking pretty good. And then I like to just put some soil behind the moss pole to stabilize it. That should be pretty good. So I've not buried the crown too much. So that is up against it like so. And then the next stage, once you've got it more or less planted up, is to get some tape, which I thought I'd forgotten, but I hadn't. And just tie the stem to the plastic pole. So I'm just going to cut off a piece like so, and then tie the stem. There we go. So that is now tied on. The area roots are up against it. And we'll start growing into it, and we'll have a nice big specimen on our hands in no time. Autumn and winter is a bit of a tricky time for our plants, our indoor plants, because of the longer nights and the shorter days means there's less light available, and plants want light above everything else. So there's a couple of solutions to that. You can move your plants around your house, maybe move some sensitive plants nearer to the window, but that can be a little bit tricky if you've got radiators underneath your windowsills, which a lot of us do. You don't really want to be putting plants there because it's going to dry out the plant, basically, a lack of humidity. So a solution that I like to do is to add more grow lights. I've already got about 8 grow lights in the house, so why not add another one? So I've picked up this Sansi grow light, and you can get a 25% discount off Sansi with a link in the description, by the way. So I've got this Sansi clip-on grow light with 2 bulbs, 10-watt bulbs each, and I've got some plants here on this fireplace mantle that is a good 1.5–2 meters away from the window, so they will suffer in autumn and winter. especially this anthurium here, a relatively new plant that I got. This will probably start to go crispy brown on the edges because of the lack of light. And then this alocasia elephant ear will start to go dormant. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to try, if it can reach, and clip this light onto this shelf here, bend it down like so, and then turn it on. And these two plants, at least, will have some good light during autumn and winter. This Philodendron New Red is the perfect example of how a plant will follow the light like a moth does, because it's tucked behind this wall here, and as you can see, the stem has got all twisted as it's trying to search for the light from the window that's behind me. So it's become quite a lanky specimen. It's put on quite a lot of growth this year, and it's not really sustainable as it is, because it's so lanky, it's already toppled itself onto the floor. So I put it into a bigger pot, but I don't know, I think this plant needs to be sorted out, but I'm not really sure what to do about it, but I guess we'll figure it out together. So basically, I don't think repotting this guy is the answer, because it's basically been supported by the heavy porcelain pot that it lives in. If I was to get it out and just have it in its nursery pot, plastic nursery pot, then it topples over very, very easily. There you go. So this guy, I think, needs to be cut back. So what I'm going to do, I've got my big pruners here. I'm going to make a cut on the plant about there, just underneath that leaf node. There we go. So we now got a top cutting that I'll put there for the moment. So this guy will now, where I made the cut, grow a new stem. Hopefully it'll grow in a straight fashion. I'll have to get a stick on it to support it so the same thing doesn't happen again. So I'm not going to chuck that away, that will just continue growing. And I might just pop that back in its porcelain pot like so. And then I've basically propagated this plant. So I've got a nice top cutting here. I'm going to start by removing some of these lower leaves. So we're removing the lower leaves to help the plant to help the cutting in the rooting process. If you have too many leaves on a cutting, then it's going to draw too much water from the cutting, and it's going to be much, much slower to grow roots. So you only want just 2 or 3 leaves at the top, basically. So I'm just tidying it up as well. And also the other reason is that if you pop the cutting with leaves at the bottom into soil, then the leaves are just going to rot. That's going to seriously compromise the cutting. I'm going to chop that leaf. So it looks a bit drastic doing this, of course, but I think it is better for the long run. And I've also got a free plant on my hands now. So it's a bit of an awkward shape, as you can see. It's a very twisted cutting this is going to be. So I'm just trying to figure out the best way to do it. I might have to just cut it back a bit more in between that leaf node. So it's got lots of area roots, which are good. So this will help the plant, or help the cutting make roots. So I'm just going to get rid of some of these sheaths that have grown from when it put out the leaves. Okay, I think that's where the new leaf is going to come out from. Okay, still a bit awkward. So I'm going to put that aside. So I've got a pot ready-made of Cybertanica's Universal Mix. So you can put cuttings straight into soil. You don't have to put it into water or perlite. They will grow roots in soil, but you just won't be able to keep an eye on progress. It's probably easier, in fact, to do it straight into soil, just because you're not having to worry about transplanting it after it's grown roots in water. It just grows roots straight into soil. Okay, so I've added my cutting. I'm trying to get it nice and deep into the pot so it stabilizes itself. There's going to be a change of plan. I'm going to empty the soil a little bit, just so that I can get it in the pot. I was struggling to force it in. So what I'm going to do instead is to half fill my pot with soil, grab my cutting, like so, and then backfill around it. Okay, so that's nicely in there now. All that's left to do, as with any repotting that I do, I always give the soil a good drink. And it's especially important with cuttings because you want the cut end to have some nice moisture to start growing roots, like so. So I'll put this in a nice bright spot for it to grow roots. It probably will do a bit slowly now that we're in autumn, but it will grow roots as long as you've given it enough light. One of the big mistakes you can make at this time of year is to make your plants go cold turkey, to stop feeding them whatsoever. Now you might have read or seen a video to say that plants will stop growing during autumn and winter and then we should stop feeding them, but in my experience that's not really the case. I always find that plants like this jade plant here will continue growing in autumn and winter because they're living obviously in our warm homes and there is some light, so they will continue growing. So I will feed, as I normally do, my houseplant focus by growth technology, and I'll feed away like this Monstera here. This will continue growing, so I will continue feeding it, and I will just dilute the feed a little bit just because they're not growing as vigorously as in spring and summer. So just dial down the fertilizer a little bit by diluting it. Our plants have really enjoyed spring and summer. They've put on tons of growth, but that does mean that they can get a little bit top heavy, a little bit overgrown. And that's exactly what's happening to my Schefflera here. This is my umbrella plant, and it's put on quite a lot of growth this year, maybe a quarter of new growth, the top section. But as you can see, it's looking a little bit top heavy, like it wants to topple over. I do have some bamboo sticks helping to keep it upright, but I think it needs a new pot, looking a little bit too small. Dust and dirt accumulates on our plants pretty much all year long, of course, but it does become more of a problem in autumn and winter because of the longer nights and the shorter days. So there's less opportunity for our plants to photosynthesize, and that is harder still when there's a thick layer of dust on the leaves. So it becomes more of a problem for our big leaf specimens like the snake plant here or Sansevieria. So those big leaves are ripe for dust to collect and settle on the leaves. So you'll often find in your Sansevieria they get quite dusty quite often. So it's a good idea just to grab a wet towel or a moist towel like so, and just go in maybe once a month, maybe a couple of months, something like that, and just give the leaves of your big leaf plants a good clean. So this will allow the plant to photosynthesize just a little bit better when the light is not forthcoming outside during autumn and winter. A great thing to do in October is to take your succulent, like this Echeveria or Echeveria, and take a couple of cuttings from it for it to grow roots over autumn and winter so they can start pushing out leaves come spring. So you might not think that you can propagate your plants in autumn and winter, but you most definitely can, provided you provide them with enough light, like I will with this guy, I'll show you in a bit, and give them warmth. If you give them at least, I think it's 10 or 12 degrees Celsius, then roots will continue to grow over winter. So with this guy, you just want to grab a leaf cutting, the lowest hanging fruit. Don't want to go near the top because they're going to be trickier to come out, but the ones nearer the bottom, as long as it's a nice healthy leaf, just grab it and twist it off like so. So there you go, a nice and easy leaf cutting. So this will grow roots once you put it into some soil. Believe it or not, that will grow roots. So what I've got here is a pot of Cybotanica's Universal Mix. I've pre-moistened it just lightly over the top, and then all you do is you take your cutting, pop it on top so that the cut end is in the soil, like so. Now you can, if you want to, leave the cutting to callus over for a day or so, something like that, just so that the scab goes over the wound, just so that it doesn't rot the cutting before it has a chance to develop roots. But in my experience, at least for me, touch wood, I've not experienced that. I just pop it straight into soil. So this guy will live just behind me on under these grow lights right here. So that's providing them with enough light over autumn and winter. They'll grow roots and they'll start sending out new leaves come spring. Your orchids may well have stopped flowering by now. And you might have ended up with 2 spent flower spikes like I have on this plant here. But if we cut them back, we should get secondary flowers. You can already start to see it here. There's a new spike just starting to emerge. So what you want to do is you want to find the top unopened node and cut just above there. Give it about 1 inch of space. So we can cut that off. All these nodes have had flowers growing out of it. So we can cut that off, discard that. It'll focus its energy on now producing new flowers from these unopened nodes here. So when you've got 2 spikes like I have here, the pro tip is to cut one of the flower spikes lower than the other. Like I'm going to do here. I'm going to cut that one just there. And that means that the orchid will now focus its energy on producing flowers on this spike. If you have them both at the same level, then you tend to get less vigorous regrowth of flowers. It may well be November, but that doesn't mean that we can't continue to clone our plants. So I've got my pothos devil's ivy here, climbing up this burlap moss pole that I recently purchased in my local hardware store. And as you can see, the stems have outgrown it. They're flopping over the side of the burlap moss pole. So normally with a moss pole, we can just continue to extend it. But in this case, with this burlap one, we can't. So that means what we should do is to prune them back. So you can grab your stem piece that's hanging over the side, and then just where you want to make the cut, near where the base of the plant is, just want to locate a leaf node. A leaf node is just where the leaf is growing out of the stem, and you want to cut just in front, like so. This looks like it's still attached to this burlap moss pole somewhere. Looks like the roots have grown into it, so I can cut that off. So that will, by cutting in front of the nodes, that will allow the existing stem to regrow a new stem basically. And then we're left with a piece like this, a long piece like this. But that isn't just one cutting. Each of these leaves can be its own cutting. It will develop roots. So all we need to do is to cut in between each of these leaf nodes. So that's a leaf node there and that's a leaf node there. So you can cut just in front of that one. The top piece we could root as well, so I'll put that to the side there. So we've now got this leaf node here where I've cut just in front, and I'm going to cut just behind, like so. So that is one cutting. So new roots will develop at the bottom of where we made the cut, and then when they develop roots, we'll pop them on and then a new stem will grow there. So that is one cutting. I'll show you where to put them in a sec. So we can just go through, tidy up that stem piece there, and then cut, cut just behind that node. So that's another cutting there. So I've got 2, and you can just continue to go through. Hopefully I won't drop these on the floor. So you want a fairly decent portion of stem just to allow it to develop roots properly, and that one just trim back a little bit. If there's an aerial root that's growing, then you can leave that on there. That will develop into part of the root system. The substrate you use to root is entirely up to you. I've got a glass of water here, so I'm just going to pop them in a glass of water. You can just put them straight into soil. They will grow roots in soil. Might be a bit slower. Or you can put them into perlite. Perlite's a good one. If you use a perlite prop box, then that will increase the humidity around the cuttings and they root dead quick. So I put them into this glass of water, and then it's just a case of putting that somewhere nice and bright and not too cold. Anything kind of above 15 degrees is a minimum really. But the main thing is making sure that the leaves get lots of light so that the stems will start to grow roots. Through the many years of looking after all my plants, I've come to realise, unfortunately, that Oxalis triangularis and my house aren't best friends. I've got one here living underneath this fancy grow light here, and it's looking like a bit of a leggy mess, isn't it? All these petioles are stretching for the light, even though there's a fancy light over it. So what I'm going to do with this, and it's something I do every year now for this plant, I'm going to force it into dormancy. So that basically means at the end of summer or autumn, as we are now in November, I'm gonna pop that somewhere dark and cool. I'm not gonna water it until spring basically, and all the leaves are gonna die off. It's gonna look like a right crispy mess. And then come spring, I'm gonna repot the plant basically, get the bulbs out, because these stems grow from bulbs in the soil. Get them out, put them into new soil, and then a fresh flush of new growth is going to come through. And this plant always looks nice when it's growing nice and fresh. And then by the end of the growing season, it tends to look a bit like a straggly mess. So I do force it into dormancy. I've got a video all about this that goes into much more detail that you can check out up here. Right, it's now time to channel your inner Jamie Oliver. Grab a lemon, chopping board and knife, and then some pruners. Because after a long, hard season of pruning our plants, especially the amount that I do, I'm always pruning and washing them after each pruning, they do tend to go a little bit rusty. Even though I've really tried my best to take care of these, they are a little bit rusty around the edges. And rusty pruners isn't good for our plants, not very healthy when we're cutting our plants and with rusty pruners. So there's a homemade remedy to clear that, which involves a lemon in a bowl. So just cut your lemon in half, squeeze it into your bowl. This one's a bit of a tough lemon to get the juice out, I think, but it is quite juicy actually. So I reckon about the juice of half a lemon. You can go a little bit more if you've got large pruners or they're particularly rusty. And then you just want to get your table salt, regular salt, pour that into the lemon juice like so, and then give that a mix. I've forgotten my spoon, so I'll get that. Give that a mix in here. So the lemon juice is going to cut through the rust and the salt is going to act as an abrasive basically. I'll give that a mix. You can get rid of the pips just to make your life a bit easier, but for the purposes of this, I'm not going to bother. So you want a bucket or something, pop your pruners in and then just pour the solution over the pruners where the rust is. So I like to get my scrub daddy, which is a great invention, and just get in there and just scrub the rust off the pruners. So I'll do an initial scrub like this, just to get the mixture in all the nooks and crannies, like so. And then I'll leave it for about half an hour, something like that, for the lemon to really penetrate the rust. I'll come back, give it another scrub, and then the rust will be gone. And then you just want to give it a nice thorough rinse at the sink area, under the water. And you should have nice clean pruners. You should never be afraid to prune your plants. They will always grow back, even in autumn and winter. As long as you've got normal indoor temperatures and you've got good enough light, they will continue growing. And if something's not growing how you want it, then it's a good idea to prune it away. And that's what's happening to this coleus plant. So, I don't know if you can see, but we've got the main plant here, which is this section. And then this one here is a stem that started to grow at the bottom, and it's becoming too dominant. I don't like that. I want this to be the main plant to grow nice and strong. And I don't want that to be the main plant, because if that starts taking over, it's going to grow all the way over there and it's going to become a lopsided plant. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to cut it back like so. So that will now develop probably a couple of new stems. This one should now start to grow a bit more, hopefully. And this will now become the main part of the plant, which is exactly what I want. And for the bit that you cut off, you don't want to throw that away because it will develop roots. Pop that in water or even soil or perlite. Take off the lower leaves like this so they don't rot in the substrate that you choose. Take off those lower leaves, have about 4 leaves at the top. Pop that into water, it'll grow roots dead quick. A coleus always grows dead quick. You'll have a fresh new plant. So the days are getting shorter in November, and that means that our plants do tend to suffer. So you might think having a load of your plants next to a nice big bay window like this in my dining room, this faces east, you might think that the plants will be perfectly fine here as the days start to get a bit shorter, but that's not necessarily the case. And it's why I recently purchased, within the last year or so, this magical device here. This is a light meter. So this will give me a steer on how much light certain areas in my home are getting. And it's been a real game changer because it does give me surprising results. This shelving unit here with a bunch of my plants, it's right next to this window, faces east in the morning, so light comes shining through. It's morning at the moment as I'm filming this, although it is a cloudy day. But you might think, this is a nice bright spot, right? Well, not necessarily. When I turn it on and I shine it over here, or I put my light meter over here for the light to shine onto it, it's giving me a reading of about 200 foot candles, which is quite low. Really, plants need at least 400 to 500 foot candles for them to really thrive and push out lots of new stems and lots of new leaves. So this spot here isn't getting anywhere near 400 foot candles. This is low light spot, which you wouldn't necessarily think. So I highly recommend getting a light meter to add to your arsenal of tools along with your moisture meter to really tell you how your plants are doing in the certain spots in your home. So there are things that you can do to up the light when you've got a low reading like I have, and I'll show you in the other room. If you are really struggling for light in your home, particularly in winter, then I do recommend grow lights, of course. I always bang on about them on the channel. But to show you the power of a good grow light, I've got this croton that's been living under this grow light for a few months now. And you will notice that the lower leaves have a nice red tinge on the croton. That's what you want to see with a croton, red tint to the leaves. That's when the plant was growing in the greenhouse before I bought it. I brought it home, put it on my windowsill, and the leaves started to come out yellow and green. Not yellow in a bad way, just the tint of the leaves. And that means that the plant is not getting enough light, basically. But then, since moving it back underneath the grow light, or to the grow light, back underneath highlight, the leaves have started to go out red again. That's exactly what you want to see with a croton. So I highly recommend grow lights, and you can get a 25% discount off all Sansi lights with my link in the description. So do check it out. I've now put on the heating during the mornings and evenings to take the chill off because it is getting quite chilly here in Sheffield now. And that means that there's lots of dry air swirling around from the radiators. And to be honest, most of our plants do tend to do okay with that. They tend to grumble on during autumn and winter. But if you do have a couple of plants that are small enough and you do want to dote on them and they are suffering, then a good option would be to take a cloche or something similar and put something over the top to trap the humidity in. So don't really buy into buying humidifiers or adding pebble trays or things like that because they don't really work, and misting plants. They don't really do much to increase the humidity sufficiently for our plants. But this will work. So I've got a little alocasia here, a little small one that I'm trying to dote on because I've had it for a couple of years and it's remained this size. So I do have it under a grow light to prevent it from going dormant, and I want to increase the humidity around it to see if that works over winter. So you can take a cloche, would be good because it would be nice and wide with a little knob on top that you can pick it up with. But I've only got this clear vase basically until I buy a cloche. But this should fit over it carefully if I get that leaf up like that, like so. So that will now trap the humidity in, you'll see condensation, and the plant should start to thrive, fingers crossed. You do want to just lift it up every couple of days, something like that, just to get the air in, to avoid mold and stuff from developing. When you're watering your plants in autumn through winter, then you really want to avoid doing it like this. I've got my satin pothos here, I'm just spraying water all over the leaves, and I've also got my Philodendron here. You might be tempted, because it's a bushy plant, just to pour water over the top, and that's generally a bad idea. It's a bad idea all year, but especially in autumn and winter, because of the cooler temperatures, the leaves are going to take much longer to dry out, and when leaves stay wet, that's when you start to get mold and disease on your plant. So it's a really bad idea. So a much better way to do it is just to peel back the leaves and just water the soil, like so. So it can be tricky with certain plants like this Philodendron here, but if you just pull it back enough, don't have to be too gentle with it, and then just try and water the soil only. It's something I recommend all year long. After the long growing season of spring and then summer, our plants can end up looking a bit straggly, a bit of a straggly mess. And that's what's happening to this begonia, Rex begonia that I've got. It's looking quite stretched, quite leggy. Lots of yellowing leaves, as you can see. lots of crispiness at the base of the plants, like that. Now you might think that because it's autumn going into winter, that you can't prune your plants, you can't repot them, so you just have to leave them to just sit there and grin and bear it and don't do anything to them, but that's not necessarily the case. You can do all of those things and you can rehab your plant in winter because you don't want the plant to be sat there looking like a horrible mess. So we're going to sort out this guy now. And here she is. Obviously she's a lot smaller now, but she's looking much healthier. So what I did, I took cuttings of the mother plant and put them into soil to root. Begonias are quite easy to root. So I put them into soil to basically restart the plant, and it should do that even though we're heading into winter. It will grow roots, probably a bit slowly, but it will grow roots and new leaves will start to emerge in spring, and we should have a nice bushy plant. So I've got it in my clear plastic pot so I can keep an eye on what's going on in terms of the roots, start to see the roots growing. And I've got it on this terracotta saucer because I haven't got a decorative pot for it, so I'm going to put it back on the shelf where it was. And we'll check progress on this in future update videos. Unfortunately, pests are always ready and waiting to hitch a ride and go onto your plant and make a new home. It's particularly the case now that the heating is on. That dry air is the perfect environment for spider mites to start invading your plants. So you want to be extra vigilant in checking them over. So this is particularly the case for bushy specimens like this pothos planter I have here. Lots of nooks and crannies for spider mites to kind of hide out and make a little home. So what I like to do is to grab a light, like the light on your mobile phone, and just go in and just see if you can see any very fine webbing or any specks moving around. So it will be quite hard to find, particularly the specks. But if you see very fine webbing where the leaf meets the petiole, then that might be spider mites. If it travels a long distance from, say, this leaf to this leaf, there's a big web there, then that's just going to be a house spider, not spider mites. It needs to be very concentrated in a very specific area. So just go in with your light and give it a good look over. This is where my Rex begonia was suffering that I rehabbed. Next to it is a red flame begonia, I think that's what it's called. And as you can see, there is tons of crispy leaves, and this is absolutely perfect for spider mites and other pests to come and invade. So we want to make sure we go in and clear all these dead leaves. Okay, so I've got rid of most of the dying leaves. Let's open the plant out and it's going to make it much less hospitable for spider mites. I already mentioned the light meter earlier, and that's been a game changer in my house for me. But if you're a subscriber to the channel, then you'll know that my favourite device is the moisture meter. It's the best thing since sliced bread. And November, autumn and going into winter is when you'll really need your moisture meter, because plants may seem dry on top, but then you have no idea really how wet or how moist they are unless you go quite deep into the pot. So obviously the light is a lot less these days and the temperatures have gone down. So your plants aren't using as much energy as they were, and they're not drying out as quickly. So that can either mean that you're not watering enough because you completely stop watering entirely, which is the wrong thing to do. Or if you continue to water as you did in spring and summer, then you're going to run into problems. So you need to use your moisture meter. So this jade plant, in fact all of these plants, I've not watered for 2 weeks I think. So this jade plant feels nice and dry on top. But let's have a look inside. Go nice and deep. You want to go into the bottom half of the pot because that's where all the roots are going to be and where the moisture is going to be sat. And lo and behold, we are on moist on the moisture meter, reading 6. So that doesn't need a drink for probably another couple of weeks. And then we have my little Monstera here that I grew from seed. So this feels very dry on top because it's in a nice chunky chunky aroid mix. I'll stick my moisture meter in. If I can get it in, because it's got a lot of roots in there. Ooh, it's nearly wet. Get this out. So it's reading, it is wet. It's reading 9 on the moisture meter. I only watered that 1.5 weeks ago, 2 weeks ago. So it feels dry on top, but it does look quite wet. I've got my clear plastic pot. There is condensation around the edges. So it's wet. So this doesn't need a drink for another week at least. So your moisture meter It's going to save you bacon during November, autumn and winter. It might look like that I have the perfect collection of plants, but believe me, I don't. If you dig a little bit deeper, there are some nasties. For example, I've got this, what was once a green syngonium that's just living on that windowsill there, my east-facing windowsill. And as you can see, it's got lots of yellowing, crispy leaves. So I think I forgot to water it for about 3 or 4 weeks. And when I got to watering it, it was very dry, very light, light as a feather. So all the leaves, or a lot of the leaves, went by the wayside. And I think it probably is root bound as well. So there are lots of roots coming out of the drainage holes. That doesn't necessarily mean that it is root bound, but when there's this many roots coming out of the bottom, then the chances are that it might be. So I'm going to have a look at that and prune this back. There is new growth coming through, so there is life for this old dog yet. It just needs sorting out. So I wasn't root bound or anything like that. There was lots of roots at the bottom, but that's just where the moisture hangs out. The rest of it wasn't tied up in roots. So I've given it a good prune back. So I've just got the green leaves now. I'll pop that back where it was and hopefully it will grow much nicer now.